Nunes here with us on Sactown Sports. Brenden, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Shout out Kyle because I still thought that was Sabrina Carpenter. Clearly, I've made this mistake before and was very
Three
curious
times.
about how 3 times. That makes sense. I was very curious how you heard this when, in my mind, this was a new song. But I swear I know music, and it must be a sample. I will educate myself over time.
It is a sample
But
of
I'm
Mariah
good,
Carey,
Matt.
which
I'm
is
good,
itself
Matt.
also a sample.
Brenden
Okay.
literally
I'm just looking for the nearest 2-lane drive-through.
Hey, don't listen. I just calmed down.
Yeah.
I just calmed down.
Chris,
Don't
Chris
rile
has
me
a
up
great
again.
social clip that's about to go out for you, just so you know.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Can't wait for
Another
that.
crash out.
Can't wait for that to drop. Brenden, another thing I might crash out about is on trade deadline day. It looks like the likelihood that it's going to be a pretty quiet day, not just for Sacramento, potentially around the league, unless something drops with this Giannis Antetokounmpo situation going on. But Brenden, it seems like we're just staring a Keon Ellis trade, and that's pretty much it in the face because the King 73% of the cap space is taken up by the top 4 contracts. And as much as Kings fans don't like to hear it because it sounds insulting to the players, all 4 of those assets right now, according to the league, are negative value assets. So I'm not going to give Scott Perry the pass for not making trades because he definitely needs to make some, like he's judged based off the deals that he's able to get done. But he inherited a mess, and maybe it's even messier than we thought it was.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I mean, I think that to your point, it's going to be curious to see what the value of these guys around the league is because we know that they're shopping everyone. I think if it were up to the Kings, they would move everybody. But also, they're not trying to attach draft capital to move off from any of these contracts. I think that's definitely not the case. And they're not trying to take back more salary than what they're giving out in a deal, right? If I'm getting rid of DeMar DeRozan, I don't want somebody that has next year fully guaranteed as well, unless it's a Jonathan Kuminga and we feel like they're part of our future, for example. But I mean, I think that you're on point there. I think that Keon is certainly the one that you look at and wonder of, hey, a team can acquire him without giving up any assets because he's on a minimum deal. So can you get some decent draft capital for that? I think DeMar DeRozan is the other one that I think should have. Some teams should be interested. I stop myself from saying value because I think that we all understand that it's hard to gauge where his level of value is. But I think that if the Kings were in a scenario where they had more close games, you would see the value of him being a closer more often. It's been very rare throughout the course of this season. And so he's putting up good numbers. I think that I know most people aren't like this. I don't think the Warriors are actually using this logic, but in my mind, DeMar makes a lot of sense on the Warriors now that Jimmy went down. Like, what about these games where Steph isn't playing, for example? And I think that you could use the same logic in Milwaukee. When Giannis does not play, that team sucks.
Yeah.
And having another go-to guy, I think, could be valuable. So it is going to take just another team be willing to tango. That's how this all goes down. But I do think for the most part, they're going to be attempting to move everybody. I think Dennis Schroeder's not talked about very much in this conversation. I think Dennis is very much on the market, and there were teams that wanted to sign him this offseason. The issue is that they didn't want to pay what the Kings were willing to pay. And now, obviously, they would have to inherit that contract. So I think it won't be for a lack of trying, but the two I'm certainly looking at are maybe 3 between Keon, DeMar, and Dennis.
Brenden Nunes, kind enough to join us here on Matt and Kayla this afternoon. So let's just say worst case scenario, Brenden, it is only like a Keon Ellis situation where we see him moved and you still have all of these vets that take up minutes that don't allow you to kind of move forward more so in the rebuild. What do you think we're going to see here?
I mean, more of the same, unfortunately. Like, I think that there isn't really a reason to rush in my mind. I think part of the reason and logic I have for why DeMar is a valuable piece is not only what he does on the floor, but only $10 million of his contract is guaranteed next season. So if somebody were to trade for him, then next offseason, you could reroute him again to a team that is in a tough salary cap situation. And all of a sudden, $15 million of his contract is just no longer on the table if they're willing to trade him. But point being, the Kings could have the benefit of that this offseason as well, right? Zach LaVine becomes easier to move, probably not easy, but easier all relatively than he is right now when one more year is off that contract. You could say the same thing about Malik Monk, Dennis Schroeder, Domantas Sabonis. So while it certainly would be a little bit of an eye roller and a headache to watch more of the games that we've watched throughout this entire season, I do think there is some logic in these guys should keyword, get easier to move as they get further into their contract.
Brenden, I think it's pretty clear that within the walls of the Kings organization, even if they like Keon Ellis, they don't value him nearly as much as the fan base does. And I think there's just this belief or this feeling from Scott Perry and his group that some hearts might need to be broken in terms of fan favorites being traded and moved in order to get done what needs to get done or put this team on the path to actually being relevant and being a good basketball team, hopefully at the end of this rebuild a few years down the road. But how much do you think the Sacramento Kings will end up, or rather maybe it's less the Kings and more the Kings fan base, regretting or feeling the sting of Keon being moved to probably a team that's going to be playing at the very least in the playoffs where he should be able to contribute to?
It's a weird one with Keon because I hate being the guy that is like, well, he's not as good as everybody thinks, but I do think that is kind of the reality a little bit here. And this is coming from the guy that I swear I was one of the first people to be like, hey, this two-way player playing in Stockton is pretty good. Like I love Keon and what he brings to the court, but he can't guard Luka, for example, right? Like he does have some size disadvantages. And when everybody makes of his defense, I very much get it. I think off the ball, he's a menace. He mucks up the game. He gets deflections and he creates turnovers. On the ball, he's not great at keeping his guy in front of him. I think it's more recovery. And after somebody gets past him, he's going to try to poke the ball from behind, or he's going to try to recover and get a block. And I think that the defensive aspect of him, while it is phenomenal, is very strictly on ones and twos. And there's not that much switchability there. So I think it is a little bit, I think Keon could get a little bit overvalued at times. There's not much ability to put the ball on the floor. You don't want him to bring the ball up the court. I think there were examples, and he's gotten better at this, but there were examples early on of him having 8-second violations because they're trying to get him to bring the ball up the court. And you're seeing them do that less because I don't think there has been that much progress in that aspect. So a long way of saying I think he may be slightly overvalued by the Kings fan base when it comes to, hey, we want to keep this future piece that we think is going to be a core member. You're fine being a fifth starter on a team. And I just think that's the reality of what we're talking about with Keon. Maybe a great 6th, 7th player, for example, but he's going to look really good on one of these championship teams. And I think that's why a first round pick is within the realm of conversation, because we're probably talking about a pick in the late 20s. And again, he's on a minimum salary. So as much as everybody made a big deal, myself included, of them turning down his option, or more so picking up his option this offseason, and the value that may have led them to, or the point it led them to, if they're able to get a late first round pick or multiple second rounders, in my mind, that's a good outcome and a good way to go about your asset management.
We're talking Kings with our own Brenden Nunes here at Sactown Sports. All right, so Matt brought this up yesterday. We talked about Devin Carter and, the lack of play that we've seen out of him this year. He's just not playing. What do you think the plan is for Devin, and will we see any more of him if there are some pieces moved?
I think that we're kind of seeing the plan for Devin, unfortunately. I imagine that if he was in the plans, that he would be out there. Doug Christie loves the word logjam when talking about this guard position. I can't tell you how many times we've heard him say that. And that's very much what is going on here, and why it participates in why he's not able to get minutes. But I think for the most part, every impression we've gotten is it just doesn't seem like they think he's good, because you would play the guy if you thought so. I heard you guys talking about the Rising Stars game a little bit earlier. And of course, we're just all looking at the rookies. I look at the sophomores a little bit and I'm like, they're only sophomores, Devin Carter. And the guy, or are we in year 3? Actually, I could be having this wrong.
This year 2.
But anyways, yeah, year 2.
Seems like 5.
And we don't know. He has not played. He's played 504 minutes in his NBA career. Now, I trust that, at least assume that they have seen bad things in practice, right? And that's the reason that he's not out there. Has to be. To exactly what you're saying, Matt. Has to is certainly the correct wording, because what the heck? You're a team that sucks, to be blunt, and you're not playing one of your young talents that has some sense of upside, or at least, hey, let's figure out what this guy can be. You know, it feels a little bit like he's going to go somewhere else, and maybe he's going to get some run. Maybe he's not. I don't think this is a Colby Jones, you know, where he's going to go to Washington and not play and absolutely disappear. Shout out Frankie Cardicelli. Like, I think that there is at least potential for something more. And given the way that this season is gone, I am certainly pro throwing him out there. But I also understand that, hey, say that that's the case, that probably means that one of Keon or Malik are not playing that given night. And we're going to sit here and you guys are going to ask me about what the heck's going on with one of those guys not playing. So I get Doug's dilemma with the logjam a little bit, but I do think that, hey, you're not a good team. This is one of your young players that could be something. Why not throw them out there? But I just assume that they've seen it. They've seen enough traumatizing things in practice for that not to be the case.
Well, Brenden, a night like tonight is the perfect night to do it because Zach LaVine's out, Malik Monk is out. We know Keegan Murray's been out. Like, now is the time, a theory where you've got so many bodies out. Hey, throw Devin Carter out there against the Knicks and see what happens. But I feel like Doug McDermott is going to get the opportunity tonight. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, I think that's probably what I would assume.
Yeah.
Maybe not Doug, or maybe even it's, you know, some of these other guys at the end of the roster. Maybe it's just Precious gets more minutes.
Yeah.
Dylan gets more minutes, you know. I think that we've seen Doug over the last roughly 20 games or so lean more towards size, right? When Doug McDermott started playing was the sign of this to me. I was like, oh, Malik is getting DNPs and we're playing Doug, huh? Like that's the way that we're going to go about this. I think Dario Saric played a couple games in Portland, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I think that Doug has leaned more into a preference of size and having some semblance of that. You know, I'm not very much a subscriber to Keegan Murray needs to play the three. Like, you hear this conversation all the time. To me, I think that the reason they're saying that is because you just need more size next to him, right? It's not about Keegan playing any differently when he's at the three. I think it's that lineup wise, and what we want to create is having Keegan be our third tallest player, for example, right? And having another guy in between the level of him and Domas or whatever the future center may be. And so I tend to agree with you, Matt. I think that we probably would see more of these bench guys before Devin Carter gets some run.
Here comes McBuckets.
McBuckets
He's coming.
I was waiting for that.
Doug told me he cannot Dougie, by the way.
I shockingly.
Come on, Doug. I mean, Brock Purdy can do it.
Yeah, but Brock has a little swagger to him. I don't blame.
He's just got good hair.
That's like if
you know?
Doug McDermott Douging is like if Matt George were to Dougie. But at least
now Matt George is going to have to Dougie.
At least Doug has good hair.
You know who I know can Dougie? Dylan Cardwell. There's no way he can't Dougie.
Dylan.
And that was my question.
Dylan can do anything.
I mean, not that he can Dougie, but how and what I should say, how impressive you've been with this little stretch of Dylan. But what do you still need to see here with this later second half of the season from him to say, hey, I could see him in the future really being a rotational player?
I think it's just, this is a vague way to answer this, but it's kind of just more progress with everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think the rebounding that we've seen is certainly a step. This is a guy that averaged 5 rebounds in college, and he's put together some double-doubles. I think that limiting his fouls is a big part of this. It's certainly something that you love, his willingness to protect the rim and how committed he is to doing that, hey, if I get a whistle, that's not going to stop me from doing that just because I'm at 5 fouls. But I think it's the, reaching in, the little ticky-tacky ones that could be avoided that are going to be the difference of what caliber of player he really is. And the big thing for determining where he's going to end up in the NBA is really just what can you do on offense?
Yeah.
Because right now the answer is, you can relocate around the dunker spot. I think his off-ball movement is solid, but he's dunking the ball every time.
Yep.
And that's fine. That's fine. There are players like that, right? When I try and think of what sort of comp we're talking about, and this is high-end outcome, I don't think that we are currently at this point, is like a Tyson Chandler, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the other part that goes into that is just the screen setting and how capable and effective you are as a screener. I think that that's something that we've seen mixed results from him and Maxime Raynaud. I think it's one of the more undersung parts of this season is that honestly, these guys are not very good at setting screens. And Domas certainly is. It's something that they can learn over time. I think that's very much an NBA learning curve. But for the most part, I do think that can your offense be something decently effective, even if it's just screen setting and rolling to the rim and being able to not be horrible from the free throw line? Matt knows this. Every time he takes free throws, I can't help but sit there and record them because I am waiting for a horrible miss.
Brenden pulls the phone out immediately. As soon as Dylan Cardwell steps to the line, Brenden is locked in.
I can't help it. Like, he gets fouled, and I'm hyped back there.
It's like a guilty pleasure.
Let's see this. Yeah. But I do think that there has been a lot of progress. And I'll tell you, there was a game maybe within the last 5 or so where he hit a couple hook shots back during this home stretch. And that stood out to me because I remember sitting there in practice and watching him work. I remember specifically with BJ Armstrong, assistant general manager, right? Former player, sitting working on his hook shots and all this around the basket touch game. And to be honest with you, I never posted this intentionally because it was really, really bad. Like missing everything. So that's why that game stood out. There was one he did with the left, one with the right. Matt, you've mentioned this, but I think he's made more progress from the beginning of the season to now than probably any player on the Sacramento Kings.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that in itself is an encouraging sign for his future. There's still certainly a lot of things that need to go well, and I think we could be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves with this Maxime Raynaud, Dylan Cardwell hype. But it's also, what we should hold on to throughout the course of this entire season.
Give us something, Brenden.
Progress.
Give us something.
There's progress that needs to be made before I'm like, hey, this guy is 100% an NBA player.
We got Brenden Nunes joining us, Sactown Sports' Kings insider, Kings beat writer. And Brendan's right, by the way. We do overhype, but we can't help it during this freaking god-awful season. Dylan Cardwell has given us life, that's for sure. Kings and Knicks tonight, part 2. Brenden, is there any emotional charge left over for the Mike Brown stuff, or has that played its course now that he's returned to Sacramento and the Kings beat him? I have to imagine if there's emotional charge, it's from the Knicks side of things because they want to get a little bit of revenge for how bad that game was. But from the Sacramento perspective, is that over and done with in your mind?
I mean, maybe Keon feels a type of way. That would be the only one, is if Keon's out there. Maybe I would also argue that him trying to do too much maybe will not play into his style of game and exactly what you want to see, but I could be wrong. I think that for the most part it's probably over. And what you mentioned, that there's not that many players on Sacramento's roster that are still here, honestly, which is kind of crazy. A decent amount of turnover, and I think it'll be more so that the Knicks are trying to get some sort of revenge or get back for getting just blown out in Sacramento to a team that's not very good. You'd imagine that a team flirting with being towards the top of the East is slightly offended by that and trying to even the series.
Sabonis is playing tonight, though, and in terms of Keon Ellis, I feel like the New York Knicks should be one of those teams in the mix to try and bring Keon Ellis in, because regardless of Mike and Keon's past, like, the Knicks could use Keon, and Keon played his best basketball under Mike. So, I don't know. That might be something to keep an eye on, too.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that Keon's, again, a guy that a lot of championship teams could like. And Matt, I know you've talked to him just as much. I think that Mike actually liked Keon.
He did.
As funny as that is.
He did.
Like, Mike will tell you, like, hey, I'm the one that gave this guy a chance.
Yes.
He was a two-way player.
And there were people in the organization that didn't want Mike to give him that chance. People don't talk about that. Mike gave him the opportunity.
100%. So I think there's more love there than people really realize.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think so. You got to balance, what the people above you want as well in all of this. And so I think it's just a little bit of a weird situation with everything that went down with Keon. But yeah, certainly a team that I think could use him. I think that they were also one of the teams that was interested in Dennis Schroeder in the offseason before he ended up signing with the Kings. Now, when you try and look at their salaries, they're in a really tough spot. And that's where you get to the point of, like, I think it would have to be Mitchell Robinson. And I don't think that would be part of the conversation. I think the Knicks are doing anything they can to trade for more win now pieces that will help them for Gershon Yabusele. Like, that's the contract that we're really talking about, right? And I don't think that Dennis fits into that, for example. Maybe Keon does, more so. Definitely does salary-wise. But, yeah, I think one of those teams to keep some tabs on a little bit. And I also got to say, Mike beating Jordy, Knicks, Nets by like 50 points the other day was just rude.
Yes.
That is
that was
rude
not
to
nice
do.
to do to your former guy. Brenden, before we let you go, because you can back me up on this really quick, because I want to address this from the Sactown Sports comment line from PE Time. He says, Mike was forced to give Keon a chance. Let's be on the up and up. No, that is completely not true. Mike is the one that lobbied for Keon to get his first chance. Remember, Mike started Keon against the Thunder in an NBA Cup game in place of the injured De'Aaron Fox. There were members of the organization that wanted Mason Jones to get that opportunity over Keon Ellis, and Mike was the one that gave Keon that opportunity. So let's be on the up and up with what's really going on. Mike was not anti-Keon. He was always pro-Keon, gave Keon that opportunity. He just wasn't willing to give Keon as long of a leash as guys like De'Aaron and Domantas Sabonis, which he talked about openly. And now you have Doug Christie, who is in theory a Keon Ellis coach who still doesn't play Keon Ellis. So if you want to be on the up and up, get that part of history right with the Kings and stop blaming Mike Brown for that.
You're cooking, Matt. You're cooking, Matt. I 100% agree. It's crazy to me to hear people even be like, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how all this went down. Like I did some other pod a while ago and they were like, hey, I thought that like part of the reason Mike got fired is because he didn't really get along with De'Aaron Fox. And I'm like, that could not be further from the truth.
Completely.
The exact same thing you just said with Keon. They wanted to play Mason Jones. And keep in mind who they is here, right? Because this isn't Monty McNair. This isn't Wes Wilcox. This is from higher up in the organization that did not want to play Keon Ellis. And so when people sit here and be, hey, we've been through 2 head coaches and neither one of them want to play Keon Ellis. Well, what's the consistency through all this, right? You're still under the same ownership. And if they feel a type of way about this player, then he's probably not going to get out there that much. And I do think that is as simple as it is. You know, we know that Vivek is very involved in everything going on. And to an extent, I don't really blame him for that, right? Being involved, I get it. This is your business. You own this. This is your baby, essentially. But trust the people that you hire to do their job, essentially, right? I think you can have your input and people could tell you why you're wrong. But if you're not willing to listen to that, then in my mind, that's where the flaw comes in. And so, yes, I think to your point, Matt, I think that the fact that we've seen this over 2 coaching staffs, to me, that's not both coaches not liking Keon. Like we have had conversations with Mike and know that Mike likes Keon for a fact, right? He might be a little bit Steve Kerr where he's going to rely on the veterans and doesn't really want to play the young guys. Hey, if you're messing up, then I'm going to pull you, you know? That aspect certainly factors into this, but it's not a coincidence that 2 head coaches in a row are sitting here talking about defense. Hey, man, we just want to be a good defensive team. That's our priority. I don't even want to talk about the offense. It's all about defense. But by the way, I'm not going to play Keon Ellis. Like, there is a flaw in this logic that goes higher than the coaching staff.
Brenden Nunes is all over this Sacramento Kings coverage for Sactown Sports. Check out the Sactown Sports app, sacktownsports.com, to read all of his great work. Of course, follow the Instagram page, too, to see all of his videos of when Dylan Cardwell steps to the free throw line. Brenden, love you so much, my man. We'll talk to you very, very soon. Can't wait to have you back on. Have fun watching the game tonight and breaking it all down. And we got to take a break. We'll